On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched 900 airstrikes against Iran in the first 12 hours of the war. By day 11, that number had exceeded 5,500. The official reason was a nuclear threat, a program that had to be stopped before it was too late. But something about that explanation has never added up. The scale of this operation, the cost, the technology, the speed, the timing, is not proportionate to stopping a nuclear program. You don't spend $11.3 billion in 7 days, permanently alter the global energy supply chain, deploy an entirely new generation of AI warfare, and call a White House meeting with defense contractor CEOs, all to neutralize a few centrifuges. Wars of this size don't happen for one reason. They happen when multiple powerful interests all want the same thing at the same time. In this documentary, we're going to follow 4 threads: the money, the machine, the politics, and the prize. And by the end, you can decide for yourself whether what you're looking at is a response to a nuclear threat or something else entirely. Welcome to BKRanks. Let's start with the simplest question in investigative journalism. Who got paid? 48 hours before the first missile crossed into Iranian airspace, the stock prices of the United States' 3 largest defense contractors hit all-time highs. Lockheed Martin, RTX, Northrop Grumman, peaking at $768.02 per share on March 2nd. Markets don't move on hope, they move on information. The question of who knew what and when is one that Congress has so far declined to ask publicly. On March 5th, 6 days into the conflict, the Trump administration released an internal cost estimate. Week 1 of the war cost $11.3 billion, over $1.8 billion every single day. On March 6th, the same day that figure became public, the CEOs of those same defense contractors were called to a private White House meeting. The outcome? An agreement to quadruple production of what the administration calls exquisite-class weaponry. The war starts, the cost is announced, the contracts are expanded in the same week. A single interceptor missile costs approximately $4 million. That is 50 high-tech hospital beds, or the annual salaries of 60 public school teachers. The Pentagon is now requesting an emergency $50 billion to replenish what was spent in the first week alone. A $50 billion restock order doesn't answer, how do we end this war? It answers, how long are we planning to keep it going? Meanwhile, at the household level, gas prices jumped 48 cents per gallon in the first week. Oil hit $120 a barrel. Global shipping costs are soaring. All of those costs land on ordinary people. None of them land on the companies whose stock just hit record highs.
At petrol stations across the United States, sticker shock as fuel prices hit their highest levels in 4 years.
It went to like $3.15. Now it's at $3.96. So it's a crazy jump.
A conflict halfway around the world with seemingly no end in sight is hitting home for Americans.
I don't have a choice because I have to drive to work every day. So it seems like I have to swallow it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you worried?
I am actually, yes. Yeah. See, every couple cents matters.
If I use like 10 gallon, it's $6 up per day. It's a lot. In a month, it's like 180.
The financial architecture of this war tells a story that has nothing to do with nuclear non-proliferation. But while the contracts were being signed in Washington, something else was happening on the battlefield, something that required this war to be fought in a very specific, very new way.
For the first time ever, the Pentagon is using artificial intelligence to scope targets.
To understand why Operation Epic Fury looks different from every war before it, you need to understand a program that has been running quietly inside the Pentagon since 2017. It's called Project Maven. Maven was built to solve a specific military problem: the The United States was generating more surveillance data than human analysts could physically process. Drone footage, satellite imagery, radar feeds, intelligence databases, and critical targets were being missed simply because no one had time to look at everything. The solution was machine learning, software that scans terrain in real time, identifies potential military targets automatically, and ranks them by priority before pushing them to a human commander for a final decision.
For the first time ever, the Pentagon is using artificial intelligence to scope targets. What used to take weeks of planning was compressed into just hours. AI detects targets and then spits out coordinates. U.S. Cyber Command and Space Force all bring it home. In addition, good old-fashioned human intelligence continues to do the dirty work and exploit regime vulnerability. Pair that with our laser weapons, gravity bombs, and precision missiles. This is the most lethal, accurate, and dangerous the American military has ever been. No one's even close. Welcome to combat in the 21st century.
By 2026, Palantir Technologies had built that concept into what is now called the Maven Smart System, a single platform pulling from 179 separate intelligence sources, converting raw data into an operational targeting dashboard. And embedded at the center of that system, as the reasoning engine, is a model called Claude, built by a company called Anthropic. In the first 24 hours of Operation Epic Fury, Maven helped identify and prioritize around 1,000 targets. Over 11 days, it enabled 5,500 U.S. strikes. A 20-person targeting team at Fort Bragg exceeded the output of the 2,000-person targeting cell that planned the entire 2003 Iraq War. CENTCOM's own chief technology officer confirmed it. Processes that used to take hours or days now take seconds. Here's the number the Pentagon has not put in any press briefing. As of 2024, Maven correctly identified objects approximately 60% of the time, compared to human analysts at roughly 84%. In desert terrain, under adverse conditions, that accuracy can fall below 30%. A 40% error rate applied to 5,500 strikes is not an abstraction.
The U.S. is currently investigating an explosion at a school next to an Iranian Navy base that Iran says killed more than 150 people, mostly schoolgirls.
An official briefed on the initial review tells PBS NewsHour the strike was likely American. Nick Schifrin examines videos and satellite images and speaks to experts for a closer look at what appears to be the deadliest strike of the war.
In the moments after the attack, the only sounds were screams. The school where many of these parents had dropped off their children not long before was now collapsed and gutted. The scale of death, clear from the air, rows and rows of tiny graves. Classmates in life and now death, a victim still wearing her backpack. Like in class, all lined up. A roll call of the dead. An official briefed on the initial review tells PBS NewsHour the strike was likely American. Video broadcast by the semi-official Mer news agency reportedly shows the strike and slowed down. Weapons experts say that is an American Tomahawk. And today, Iranian state media released these photos it said were taken at the site that appeared to show Tomahawk components.
On February 28th, in Minab, in Iran's Hormuz province, a strike hit the Shashara Tayyeba Elementary School for girls while class was in session. At least 180 civilians were killed. No military target in or near the building has been officially confirmed. Dr. Peter Bentley, a computer scientist at UCL London, was direct. AI is just not ready for military targeting. This stuff is only 2 or 3 years old. It's just too soon. Researchers at the Chatham House think tank raised what they call automation bias, the documented tendency for human operators to defer to machine recommendations, even when their own judgment might catch an error. When the machine is generating 1,000 decisions an hour, human review becomes, in their words, a mere formality. This is the context in which the Anthropic dispute stopped being a corporate story and became a story about the future of war. On February 26th, 2 days before the first strike, Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei published a statement on the company's official website outlining in precise language what the Department of War demanded and why Anthropic refused. Two things. First, the ability to deploy Claude for mass domestic surveillance of American citizens. Second, the ability to integrate Claude into fully autonomous weapons, systems that select and engage targets with no human being in the decision loop at all. Amodei's position was direct. Current AI is not reliable enough to make lethal decisions without human oversight.
On fully autonomous weapons, the logic, as I understand it, it is not so much about democratic values. It's more that you think the technology is not ready for your models to be used fully autonomously. Is that right? So you have a different view of the capabilities of the technology, perhaps, than the Department of War.
Yeah, I think there's actually two things. One is this issue that you just mentioned, which is you can think of this as like a supplier of aircraft who says this aircraft is not safe to fly above a certain altitude or to turn at a certain speed. We didn't make these systems to be safe if you use them in that particular way, right? They're not suitable for this use case. Like, we haven't made them or manufactured them to work well to be safe for this use case.
And in that, was there anything specific? I mean, your model was used in Venezuela. It's being used in Iran. Is there anything in these existing use cases that has worried you?
So one thing I want to say is we started with a substantially more limited contract that enabled a more limited number of use cases that I think is in force maybe even until today. This was all about negotiating a new contract. So we had even a substantially more limited contract for quite a long time, and that more limited contract, they didn't run into problems with it on the ground. So none of this was driven by, we have concerns right now about what the Department of War was doing,
so
right?
Iran is fine, and Venezuela was fine.
I'm not expressing an opinion either way on military policy or government policy.
I'm just saying if you use of your models.
Yeah, use of our models. If you provide a service, you don't get to decide where that service is used. There's this operational side of military decisions. Of course, we don't have any say about that. What we do have say over is this question of like very broad use cases, right? It's not about any administration. It's not about any policy. It's like, how should this technology be used in general? I actually think there's a lot of value here, and I want to make sure the Department of War understands this as well. This isn't about concerns we have about actions they've taken or already taken. Like, we had a much more limited contract. We never had, concerns about this contract. This is about, going forward. How should we think about the uses and the governance of this technology?
The school in Minab suggests he had a point. The Department of War's response was to threaten to designate Anthropic a supply chain risk, a label previously reserved exclusively for foreign adversaries, never before applied to an American company, and to invoke the Defense Production Act to legally compel the removal of those safety limits. On March 6th, that designation became official. Anthropic subsequently filed suit to block it. One designation calls Anthropic a security threat to the United States. The other calls Claude essential to national security. Both cannot be true, and yet the targeting is continuing. What the Department of War established by forcing this confrontation is a new standard. AI companies providing technology for military use are expected to remove safety restrictions on demand. The company that resists gets the threat. The company that complies gets the contract. Operation Epic Fury didn't just test whether AI targeting works at scale. It tested whether the government could compel private AI companies to remove their ethical limits under the pressure of wartime necessity. And the answer so far is yes.
Next, the US Defense Secretary gave Anthropic an ultimatum this week: open its artificial intelligence technology for unrestricted military use by Friday or risk losing its government contract. Officials also warning that they could designate the firm as a supply chain risk or invoke a Cold War-era law called the Defense Production Act. Well, for more,
The money explains who profits. The machine explains how it was fought, but neither of those explains why this particular war at this particular moment against this particular country. For that, you need to understand the third layer, the one that starts in a polling office in Washington and ends in Beijing. By early 2026, the Trump administration was in a difficult political position by almost any measurable standard. Economist and YouGov polling showed net job approval had fallen to record lows for a second-term presidency. The 2025 off-year elections had produced significant Republican backsteps in New York, Virginia, and New Jersey, with Democratic candidates outperforming their district's partisan lean in race after race. Sustained public pressure over the administration's handling of the Epstein files had added another layer of domestic friction, with consistent polling showing majorities believed information had been withheld. Political analysts have a name for what historically follows that kind of domestic pressure: the rally round the flag effect. It describes a well-documented pattern in which executive approval ratings surge temporarily when a president initiates military action. After September 11th, George W. Bush's approval ratings rose dramatically, providing the political foundation for everything his administration pursued the years that followed.
CNN, Fox, Reuters, Ipsos, Quinnipiac, The Washington Post. Chalk that up to polarization. This time, we're all just suiting up in our partisan jerseys. Republicans are overwhelmingly supportive, Democrats likewise in opposition. Independents are the tiebreakers and side more with the Ds than with the Rs, and the net impact is that a majority are in opposition. But there's an additional explanation. Emmy Award-winning political journalist Jeff Greenfield wrote a memorable column for Politico 4 years ago when President Biden was weighing the extent to which the U.S. would support Ukraine against the Russian invasion. Greenfield explained that contrary to conventional wisdom, we rarely rally around the flag unless we've been attacked. Quote, foreign crises, even wars, rarely produce anything like national unity. During the Civil War, deadly riots broke out in New York City over the prospect of a draft. In 1864, Lincoln's election opponent was George McClellan, whom Lincoln had replaced as the commanding general of the Union forces. From Korea to Vietnam to Iraq, Americans have fought wars amid clamorous discontent at home, even in World War II, the quote, last good war. Discontent over everything from military strategy to home front policies divided us politically. In the 1942 midterms, Democrats lost 8 Senate seats and 45 House seats, losing the national popular House vote by a 1 million vote margin. Well, we haven't been attacked by Iran, thank God. The administration has not made a compelling case that we faced an imminent threat. I think Major Garrett framed an appropriate question for Secretary Pete Hegseth on 60 Minutes last Sunday night when he asked if the attack on Iran is more about opportunity than imminent threat.
It is worth noting that Trump himself, as a private citizen, publicly questioned whether a president facing declining poll numbers might initiate military action in the Middle East to redirect domestic political attention. He raised that scenario specifically and on the record. He is now the president. The poll numbers declined. The military action followed.
Our president will start a war with Iran because he has absolutely no ability to negotiate. He's weak and he's ineffective. So the only way he figures that he's going to get reelected, and as sure as you're sitting there, is to start a war with Iran. Now, I'm more militant and more militaristic than the president. I believe in strength. But to start a war in order to get elected, and I believe that's going to happen, would be an outrage.
You see that split. You see that a majority of Americans, 61% say, yeah, they are a threat. But 50% say military strikes are the way to handle it. The others say not. How do you see this shaking out in terms of the midterms?
Well, Rachel, good morning. The paradox is midterms are both right around the corner and 1 million years away.
Yes.
And I think everybody's going to keep talking about them. But the president knows that he did this not for the politics of it, but that the politics could work out just fine. Economic numbers continue to be mixed, and I think that's the real key. I think people will follow the war as it pertains to the midterms for the voters, less about whether the cause was just or whether Iran had access to nuclear material. It's whether the economy will turn around. And if the war goes well, if this concludes in the next 4 weeks or so, and if it leads to an improved American economy, I think voters will say great, and I think Republicans will be at least slightly rewarded. If, however, it ends militarily, it doesn't help the American economy. I think Democrats who are currently on track to do quite well will do quite well.
Yeah, so you see this.
But here is what the data actually shows. Operation Epic Fury has not produced a rally effect. NPR, PBS NewsHour, and Marist polling in March 2026 show 56% of respondents oppose the military action. The administration's approval ratings on the economy, on immigration, and on foreign policy have continued to fall. The tactic, if it was a tactic, has failed on its own terms, which makes the political chapter of this story the most unstable one. An administration that entered a war to improve its political position, spent over $1 billion doing so, and emerged more politically isolated than it was before. That is not a sustainable position heading into the November 2026 midterms. And an administration that cannot afford to look like it lost a war it started to win politically has every incentive to escalate rather than withdraw. But domestic politics by itself does not explain a war of this scale. It explains the timing, it explains the framing. What it does not explain is the target. Why Iran specifically right now? For that, you need to look at a map not of the Middle East, but of the global energy supply chain and at the country sitting at the end of it. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Through that 21-mile gap flows approximately 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas and 21% of global petroleum liquids. There is no alternative route of comparable scale. If the strait closes, the global energy system does not reroute, it fractures. That price spike is painful for everyone, but it is not painful for everyone equally, and that asymmetry is not an accident, it is the point. China is the world's largest crude oil importer. Its economy runs on seaborne energy, and that dependency is deepening. China's domestic AI infrastructure build-out, the most aggressive in the world, has driven a substantial surge in energy demand at exactly the moment that demand is becoming hardest to meet. A closed Strait of Hormuz does not inconvenience China. It threatens the energy foundation of its entire economic and technological expansion. Meanwhile, the United States has been systematically insulating itself from that same shock. In early 2026, Venezuela was effectively brought into the U.S. strategic orbit through a combination of naval pressure and targeted interventions, securing a near-hemisphere energy buffer completely outside the Hormuz corridor. Then, on March 11, 2026, the administration announced the construction of the first new oil refinery on U.S. soil in 50 years, a $300 billion project in Brownsville, Texas, engineered to process American light shale oil entirely from domestic supply, permanently insulated from any disruption anywhere in the world. Read these three moves together: the Strait disruption, the Venezuela buffer, the Texas refinery, and a single strategic logic emerges. The United States is not reacting to an energy crisis, it is engineering one for everyone except itself, at the precise moment that control of energy supply will determine who leads the next decade of global technological development. AI data centers run on electricity, advanced manufacturing runs on fuel. The country that controls the energy supply in 2030 does not just win markets, it sets the terms on which everyone else competes. The nuclear threat gave this war a headline. The Strait of Hormuz gave it a purpose, in crippling China's energy access while permanently securing America's own. That is the prize this war was designed to capture. The defense contractors needed a war to justify the contracts. The AI programs needed a war to prove their capability. The administration needed a war to reset its political narrative. And the energy architects needed a war in exactly this location, at exactly this choke point, to execute a play that has been building for years. 4 needs, 1 war, the same beneficiaries. We began this documentary with a number: 900 strikes in the first 12 hours, executed by 20 people in an AI system that gets the answer wrong 40% of the time. We followed the money. Defense contractor stocks hit all-time highs 48 hours before the first bomb dropped. The first week cost $11.3 billion. The Pentagon immediately requested 50 more. The CEOs met at the White House. The contracts were quadrupled. A war that was sold as swift and targeted has the financial architecture of something designed to last. We examined the machine. Project Maven, powered by Claude, generated 1,000 targets in the first 24 hours. Over 11 days, it enabled 5,500 strikes. And the precedent set by forcing Anthropic out of its contracts means the next AI system in the next war will have less restrictions, not more. We examined the politics. An administration at record low approval launched a war to trigger a rally effect. The rally effect did not come. 56% of Americans oppose the operation. The political logic has already failed, and an administration that cannot afford to lose has every incentive to escalate rather than withdraw. And we followed the prize: the Strait of Hormuz, the Venezuela buffer, the Brownsville refinery. A strategic sequence designed to ensure the United States emerges as the world's dominant energy provider, and that China absorbs the shock of a supply chain it can no longer rely on. 4 pillars, 1 logic. The money funds it, the machine fights it, the politics justify it, and the energy prize is what it was always actually for. The nuclear threat was the headline story. The question that remains, the one that matters most, is not whether this strategy succeeds. It is whether any of the people making these decisions will ever be asked, publicly and under oath, to explain who authorized a 40% error rate over a civilian population, who decided that forcing a safety-conscious AI company out of its contracts was an appropriate use of the Defense Production Act, and who calculated that the lives disrupted by a closed Strait of Hormuz were an acceptable price for an energy monopoly. Those are the questions this documentary cannot answer, because the people who can answer them have not been asked yet. If you want to keep following this story, subscribe to BKRanks. Every source used in this documentary is linked in the description below. We cover the stories behind the stories, the data, the timelines in the money trails the evening news leaves out. We'll see you on the next one.
Many fans in Asia, Jamaica, Atlanta. Don't come and fit the band.